Right. Once again, it appears that we are live. Here we go. So let me just, do a quick sound check. Can you hear me loudly and clearly? Oh dear. Sorry about this. This is my third show of the day. Right, you can hear me loudly and clearly. It looks like we finally got some people beginning to stream in here. One of the biggest fights of all time. No question about that. One of the biggest fights of all time. And savor it while you can. Absolutely savor it while you can, because this is one of the few times where you get the best versus the best. You get the best versus the best in their peaks. We're not having to wait 15 years, 20 years. We're getting the best versus the best at their absolute peaks. I'm currently waiting for Tony, who's to jump in. Tony, if you're listening, the link is in the chat there, ready for you to jump in. Actually, I will actually pin the link to the chat. But we're going to go through people's predictions over who they think is going to win this fight and why they're going to think it's going to win the fight. And we're going to go through the predictions. I've got some predictions for you. We're also going to go through some predictions with Tony. Sean Medieval doesn't think Spence at his peak. You don't think Spence at his peak because of his car crash. Well, Spence is still the champion. He's still undefeated. He's putting in some decent performances. Okay, close to. But, you know, this isn't like a Tyson versus Lewis. Does that make sense? This isn't versus a Tyson versus Lewis where these guys are clearly past their best. You know, this is just to the two of these guys still have a lot to offer to the sport of boxing. So while we wait for Tony, who's a former boxer, he's had many fights in the sport, and we'll be going through some of the more technical detail with Tony in just a second when he comes on. We're just waiting for his arrival. While we'll do that, I want you to give me your predictions for the fight. And while we'll do that, I've got some predictions here that we'll go through. So while we wait for Tony, who's going to come on and do the technical preview, if anybody else wants to call in afterwards, they're welcome to call in. But while we do that, I'll read through some predictions from other people, and you see if you agree with these. These are fighters, trainers, and legends are making their pick for this fight. All right, so let's go through some of these. All right, so we've got Oscar De La Hoya. I've got Crawford. I think he's a little more elusive. Spence is amazing. I promoted him for most of his career. I thought he was going to be the next Sugar Ray Leonard, but I've got Crawford. He's elusive. He throws more combinations. He's got better footwork, but who knows? You never know in boxing. Spence is strong. He's a big kid, but I just think he's too robotic, and Tony's here. I just think Crawford moves around a little more and can dodge the punches. Let me give you one more prediction, and then we'll move on. I'll tell you what, before bringing Tony, let me, oh my God, someone's trying to come in and wind me up. Let me just give someone a quick timeout there. Jesus fucking Christ. Teddy Atlas, who is the kiss of death for many people. Press one if you remember when Tony Atlas had the kiss of death on fighters, where Tony Atlas would predict a fighter to win and they would almost certainly lose. Let me know. Teddy Atlas says Crawford. First of all, he's carried all his power up. Spence is a beast. He's big. He's the more natural welterweight. He's a good body puncher, and he's got underrated jab. Technically, he's very solid. It sounds like I'm picking him, but Crawford might be the most instinctive fighter I've ever seen. He's one of the only guys in this era of fights who creates his own tunes. And another thing, he's a freaking junkyard dog. So there you go. Teddy Atlas there. Putting the kiss of death, so to speak, on Terence Crawford. But let's bring Tony in for his. Tony, just unmute yourself, because I want to ask you a series of technical questions. Have you got time for that, Tony, about boxing and the fight as a whole? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Question number one. You guys know Tony's been in the ring many times. Tony, question number one I want to ask you. A lot of things are being made about the fact that Terence Crawford is a switch hitter. How difficult is it to get in the ring with a switch hitter? And what are the kind of things that you sort of need to look for when you're getting in the ring with a switch hitter, with a switch fighter? What's the difficulty in getting in the ring with somebody like a Crawford who can change their stance? What do we need to look out for? What's the difficulty in it?
Well, I would say first and foremost that he's not a switch hitter, that he's natural in the southpaw stance, that while he may go traditional, anytime the heat turns up in the kitchen, the oven's on high, or broil, if you want to say, then he goes into southpaw by default. That is his true stance. As far as switching the stances go, it can disrupt the flow of the fight. In other words, well, see, you got to understand, Errol Spence is a southpaw, so mainly it's worse for traditional style fighters to fight a switch foot person than a southpaw, only because you never see southpaws.
Correct.
So where you're used to fighting a guy to where you're not mirrored, meaning your two lead hands aren't almost touching each other. You know, you're used to where both lead hands are offset, and that's what you're used to. Whenever somebody can switch it up, you might not be expecting it, so you run into the straight left because you're used to seeing the jab from the left come at your face. Now it's coming from behind as power. So it just disrupts the flow of the fight. It gives a different look, and is very hard to read unless you're used to fighting both styles.
Let me ask you. So hold on. Let me just throw it there. So hold on. I think what I didn't get from that was it's very hard. It can be very hard to read, but you don't think it'll be difficult to for Spence because you think he's already left-handed and he's seen that stance before. So you think he's got the best of both worlds because he's already a lefty. Sorry, Tony. I'm just trying to clarify that.
No, what I'm saying is, so for Spence, he's a southpaw, period, right?
Correct.
So that's his natural stance. So if Terence Crawford goes into the traditional stance, which he won't, and if he does, it'll be very short lived, then I think Spence is going to have a significant advantage because 95% of the fighters he's fought were all traditional. So he's
Yeah.
accustomed to that style. But what I was saying is Terence Crawford is not truly a switch foot fighter because he very rarely stays in traditional, especially if the fight gets intense. He always reverts back to southpaw. So in my opinion, he's just a southpaw fighter that can occasionally go into traditional, but he doesn't excel at it and he's not best at it. And you know, like when your back's against the wall, muscle memory comes in, and that's when you see what somebody truly is. And he always reverts to southpaw. So I think the fight's pretty much going to be southpaw versus southpaw, and I think Spence is going to have a tactical advantage with that.
I could be wrong on this, right? Again, I don't have anywhere near the experience that you do in the ring. As a southpaw, I always found it very difficult getting in the ring, and still to this day, I am useless against other southpaw fighters. Obviously, because I've only ever been in the ring with a handful of left-handers. Do you know what I mean? Most people I've ever been in the ring with are right-handed, and I know what kind of things I want to do against a right-hander. But when I get in with a left-hander, it just becomes completely different. Some of these southpaw versus southpaw fights I've seen, Tony, especially at high level, they become very cagey because of this, where you've got two southpaw fighters. The majority of the opponents over their career have been orthodox fighters. Now they're in a ring with a world-class, highly skilled left-hander. It can become very awkward, and the fights can become quite cagey. An example of a fight I saw that was like this was when Luz Ortiz got in the ring with Charles Martin, yeah? And me and many people were expecting Lewis Ortiz to run through Charles Martin like a train. Yeah, I agree with LD Phoenix. I wouldn't say Willie Monroe Jr. was quite at the top level, but Saunders versus Monroe Jr. And other examples of fights that have happened for world titles at world level, right? And you get two southpaws in the ring, and it can become very cagey. You've got two guys who are used to getting in with right-handers. They're getting in the ring with the lefties. Do you think there's any danger in this fight that if it goes southpaw versus southpaw, that we might not get the classic that people are anticipating? And you could see things like, you know, both of them struggling to establish their jabs and both of them struggling to get the backhands off. And do you think we could see something that equates to kind of like a bit of a chess match rather than the all and out sort of? I think people are almost expecting, not Hagel at Hearns, but people are expecting a blood and guts fight, aren't they, in this fight? And do you know there's a chance that with these two southpaw stances, we might get a bit disappointed?
No, because I'm going to say that it comes down to the mentality of the fighter. Like when you look at Monroe, when you look at Billy Joe Saunders, they're not like an Errol Spence Jr. that relies on volume. Like, yes, he breaks down fighters. Yes, he hits hard, but he's not a one-punch knockout artist. It's from accumulation of damage. And his whole style is based off of letting a bunch of shots go. And as the fight gets deeper, he releases more and more. Whereas Crawford, his mentality is, if you get a good lick on him, he's coming back to match you. He never wants to let anybody get the better of him at any moment. So, like, we saw that when he got dropped, even though it wasn't counted against Mean Machine. He got hyper aggressive after that. We saw against David Avanesian in his last fight, even though the glove malfunction happened, Avanesian landed some good shots on him, and then all of a sudden he comes back. So, with the mentality of the fighters, I can't see them being cagey because they both are come at you style fighters. So, while it is possible that we don't get the fight that we want to see, and it's a dud like Manny Mayweather, I don't think it will be due to both guys are hyper aggressive, and it just doesn't fit their disposition to be anything other than a lot of shots going.
Do you think Errol Spence is out of his prime? Because we've had a few people already suggesting that Spence isn't in his prime due to what's happened with the car accident. Tony, have we seen the best of Errol Spence? And by the way, I'm not making excuses. I'm simply playing devil's advocate. Tony, have we seen the best of Errol Spence, or are we going to see? Are we likely to see the best Errol Spence on Fight Night, Tony? Where do you assess where Errol Spence is at this point in his career?
Well, you never really see the best of anybody until they're in their career-defining fight, and that very well could be tomorrow night. So, if the best of Errol Spence is going to show, it will show tomorrow night. Is he past his prime? I don't know. He's 33 years old. He's not that much younger than Bud, which is why I find it funny that people try to make it like Bud is super old when they're only two years and some months apart in age. So they're very close in age. The only difference in Spence and Terrence is Spence has not really lived the life of a boxer. He drinks a lot. He's partied a lot. He's been in 3 car wrecks. One ejected him. You know, he had to have his teeth reconstructed. They're all porcelain veneers in his mouth, and he was induced into a coma. So there is, and then he also had the detached retina that came up when he was training for Manny Pacquiao, which I would say is from the car wreck. They just didn't catch it until that time because the detached retinas are very hard to see underneath the light when they first happen. So, I mean, there is the argument to be made that maybe Spence is on the decline. However, if that be the case, he really didn't show it in the Ugas fight because he had full steam and he broke Ugas down and stopped him, which he hadn't done in a while. So, if anything, being that he hadn't had a stoppage in forever, him stopping Ugas was probably his best performance in years.
Let me ask you a question quickly, and I want to ask you a question about resumes, because I know people ask about. I'm not a resume guy. I'm not sure if you're a resume guy, but I want to ask you about resumes. When you talk about this fight, Tony, and you think about who's going to win this fight, do resumes play any part in your sort of overall feeling about who will win? Because normally, right, especially on YouTube internet, and you guys especially know from the YouTube scene, most people on the YouTube scene are pretty heavy resume heavy, and they do tend to pick and go with the guys with the proven resume. Terence Crawford is still very, very unproven at welterweight. I don't know if you would agree with that. What do you think about that? Do you think that people are overlooking something about Terence Crawford and who he's actually fought at welterweight and who he's actually beaten compared to whether Errol Spence is in the ring with? Do you think there's any sort of credence in that? Because it seems, so what I'm trying to say, Tony, is it seems like for other fights that are not Crawford versus Spence, people are lean towards resume a lot as the reasons to who they think why fighter A will beat fighter B. You often you'll be saying, well, he's got a far better resume. He's fought far better fighters. This guy has fought nobody. But I just find it a bit ironic that this is the one fight and one of the biggest fights of all time. And people have seemed to chosenly overlook that Terence Crawford has a very, very thin resume at welterweight. Do you understand what I'm saying, Tony? And what do you think?
So my thing is this, and that's the problem that I have, is what you're saying at welterweight. Well, that doesn't mean much because here's the thing about it. A special fighter is a special fighter. A once in a generation is a once in a generation. Usyk had a very limited resume at cruiserweight, but it didn't matter. At heavyweight, but it didn't matter because at cruiserweight, he was undisputed, went to every champion's backyard and took their belts. Just like Terence Crawford at 140, he beat Victor Postol, who made Josh go life or death with him. He arguably beat Ramirez, and Crawford gave him his first loss when he was undefeated. He beat Gamboa, who was a pound-for-pound fighter at the time that he got in the ring with him. Terrence was nowhere near the pound-for-pound list. Gamboa was already on that pound-for-pound list, and he beat the shit out of Gamboa. Then you have Ndongo, who people say is no good, but the dude was 20-plus wins with no losses. And at the time, if you go back in history, A lot of people thought Ndongo was going to be the next star at 140, and he beat him. So with all that being said, as far as at welterweight goes, I discredit that statement a lot when a fighter has fought in other weight classes. Now, there's always the question of, does their power carry up with them when they're new to the weight class? Crawford's not new to this weight class. He's been here for, I believe, 7 fights now, this being his 8th. So he's already acclimated to the weight. So the worry about the smaller guy moving up is going to be too small has already been dispelled and proven that he can survive there. So as far as resume goes, when I look at them, I would say that I think their resumes are very close to each other because you have Crawford, who cleared out the 140 division, and you have Spence, who cleared out the 147 division outside of Crawford. They have 2 light type opponents, Kell Brook, Porter. You know, Spence caught them both before Bud did. However, that doesn't really mean a lot because if you go back in time, and I talked about this fight being a dud earlier, Manny versus Floyd. A lot of people thought Manny was going to beat Floyd because he was playing Floyd's cleanup. Outside of Marquez, he beat everybody better than Floyd. Everybody he beat better than Floyd. And they thought he had a chance. Well, that didn't really mean much when they got in the ring because he got beat like a sparring partner. So I think their resumes are very comparable. And I don't think in this particular fight that resume is going to play a factor in it because I think they're equal. In all honesty, I think they're very equal. You still with me? I don't know if we lost him. I don't know if y'all can hear me. He went quiet.
I'm here. We can all
Okay,
hear.
okay.
Do you know what, Tony, sorry. Do you know what? This mic, when you touch it, it mutes itself. And that's my bad. So I was listening to everything. I was actually trying to respond. Tony, you're absolutely fine. What I was going to say is, guys, this is more Tony's show. So what I'm going to do is be asking questions to Tony. If you've got questions to Tony in the chat, put them in the chat and I will ask them to Tony. If I'm not asking the right questions, let me know. So I'm doing this a different style. This isn't really about my opinion. This is more about Tony's opinion. And Tony's got a lot of experience in the game. Tony, you've got a lot of experience in the game, particularly around trainers, right? You've been around some pretty high profile trainers, I take it. And I wanted to ask you a question, about the trainers. I wanted to ask you about this Derek James and this Bomac, because as ever, when 2 fighters of this magnitude sort of get involved, the trainers get involved and the trainers are talking back and forth and people from the outside, Tony, who haven't been in the ring, for me, they seem to give a lot of credence to what happens outside of the ring. They really believe in the trainers making an absolute world of difference. They really believe that, a piece of advice or something from Derek James could turn the fight, or a piece of advice or something from Bomac could change the fight. I want to ask you something, Tony, and I want you to talk about your own experience in boxing as well and some of your own experience fighting, right? Am I right, Tony, when I'm thinking that at the end of the day, right, a lot of this Bomac, a lot of this Derek James stuff, at the end of the day, Errol Spence is Errol Spence. Terence Crawford is Terence Crawford. Errol Spence isn't going to be able to make any sort of a massive major adjustments from the fighter he's been in recent fights. And Terence Crawford's going to be the same sort of Terence Crawford. What I'm saying is, Tony, I'm not a big believer that there's any sort of one massive game plan that's going to come from a trainer that's going to drastically change the fortunes of this fight. I believe at the end of the day, the 2 fighters are going to get in the ring. The 2 fighters are going to be themselves, Tony. Tony, when fighters get hurt, things that they've been told in a corner can go out of the window and they go back to doing what they've been done before. So what I'm trying to say is, Tony, out of 10, right, how much of an impact do you think that these trainers, these Derek Jameses, these Bomacs, how much of an impact do you think they have on a fight? Do they really have the ability to change the outcome of this fight? Do they really have the magnitude to change it? Or is it just a case of Spence is Spence, Crawford is Crawford, and the best guy is going to win? Does that make sense what I'm saying, Tony?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I'm going to say a trainer can make all the difference. Now, if you're just talking about as far as when the fight actually happens, the trainer in the corner, the instructions, what impact that'll have on the fight, where do I see that? I would say that it could actually be very high because here's the thing. When you're in the heat of battle and you're looking at something in first-person view, think about a video game like an RPG, right? Like Dark Souls or anything like that. If you go first person, it's harder to see what's going on than if you do a third-person view, even in a race car game. So your corner, your coach, your trainer that's going to be in the corner talking to you, he's watching the fight from the outside looking in. you're standing there looking at the other guy doing what you do, but you don't really see the nuances of everything outside of the ring. So when you go to the corner, you may not notice the fact that, say, a guy like Spence, who has his tendency, every time he throws the triple jab, he drops his jab hand, exposing his chin, and he always comes with the straight behind it. While you're in the heat of the moment, you may see the punches coming, you may be able to parry, get out of the way, but when you go back to the corner, your coach looks at you and says, hey, he does 3 jabs and he drops his hands. The minute he does that step off, catch him with the hook to the face, because he's going to do it. Like, it's his muscle memory, it's his tick, it's just what he does. So whenever Bud comes out of the corner, he counts, okay, here they come. 1, 2, 3. He sees the hands drops, he's already stepping, throwing the hook. So I would say a trainer in the corner that has a good eye for what's going on can be very valuable and actually change the flow of the fight. So I think it's very important. As far as outside of the ring training for the fight, I mean, you got to think about it like this. Think about like using a car as an example. I know people are different, but you could go buy you a M4. That M4 is stock. You give that M4 to a mechanic, he's going to put upgraded turbos, intercoolers, maybe he's running E85 gasoline in it, and the car is going to go faster than it ever did off the storeroom floor. Somebody who's just driving the car will never be able to do that because they don't know how to work on it. Same thing with a trainer. He can train you in ways that can make your body react better than it ever could on your own, because they have the knowledge of how to improve you. So if you have a good trainer, I believe it's leaps and bounds, push you ahead of anything you could ever do on your own. At the end of the day, yes, you have to get in there and fight. Yes, you have to get in there and win. Your trainer can't fight for you. But the way that they make you prep your body can give you an advantage that you would never get on your own by yourself.
Let me just, this is just a bit of a curveball question, but I'm just going to ask you, every time Terence Crawford's trainer, Bomac, makes an appearance, a lot of people make question marks about his weight and things like that. Would you have a problem with somebody who weighed that much training you? Because some people would. Now, I know that Bomac obviously has had a pro career, and he had about 30 or so pro fights and stuff. So he did have a pro career himself, but how would you feel about that? Just out of interest, how would you feel? Would you feel a certain type of way if your trainer was a guy who wasn't exactly the most disciplined? Like, he had the boxing mind, obviously, but would it matter to you because he just had the mind, or would that throw you off, Tony? The fact that someone training you wasn't exactly physically fit and able to do certain things, go for a run with you, maybe be as energetic with you. Do you know what I'm saying, Tony? Would it throw you? Because I think it does. It might throw some fighters. What do you think about that? Just quickly.
I think aesthetics is all in your mind. That's what AJ found out when he fought the fat dude Andy Ruiz and got his ass lit up. He underestimated him. I think the mind is greater than what the body looks like. At the end of the day, Bomac, he's not the only trainer. He has other people to work the mids. He has other people that help him come up with the game plan. So no, I'm not going to look at a guy and say, oh, he's out of shape. He can't keep himself in shape. How's he going to do it for me? Because that doesn't mean he doesn't have the knowledge to make me better. So I'm going to go off of what their mind is versus how they look. Because you could have a guy like Derek James that's in tremendous shape, but he doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. He just looks good, but he's clueless on all the facts. So I would rather have a guy who's fat and sloppy that knows what he's talking about than a guy who looks like he's in shape and has no clue.
Do you think, if I said to you that Errol Spence is an absolutely tremendous athlete first and a very, very good boxer second, would you agree with that? Would you agree that that Terence Crawford's biggest attribute is that he's physically gifted? Like Errol Spence, Terence Crawford's one of them guys where we already know he's a very, very competent wrestler, and we've seen the videos of him doing that and things like that. You just get some guys that are just superb athletes that if they weren't boxing, they might have a shot at being a professional or going very far in another sport. Do you think Terence Crawford is as much a master boxer as he is a superbly gifted athlete? Like, he's very snappy, he's got lots of fast twitch fibers, he's a very explosive fighter. Some of the attributes that he has that I give to him are actually quite physical attributes rather than being sort of a master boxer. So let me give you an example, Tony, before I let you talk. Someone like a Bernard Hopkins, right, is somebody who I wouldn't say actually, he kind of was an insane physical specimen in terms of his longevity, right? But he was no Roy Jones. He wasn't physically gifted in terms of speed. He wasn't sort of a physically gifted an athlete of such. Do you know what I mean? What he was very, very good at, again, was he had just exceptional boxing IQ, fighting on the inside, fighting on the outside, dirty tactics, all the things that he learned. And you saw that when obviously Hopkins was still fighting at a very, very high level at age 50. And we saw that with guys like James Toney, because, you know, they just had such good IQ, such good ring IQ, that even when their physical attributes failed them, they were still able to box at a very, very high level going into their 40s. And in Hopkins' case, in their 50s. I don't see Terence Crawford as that sort of Bernard Hopkins, James Toney, fundamental master boxer type fighter. I see Terence Crawford as an exceptionally good boxer, but backed up by exceptional, even more exceptional physical attributes. Do you think that's a fair comment, Tony?
If let me answer it like this, because Roy Jones Jr. to me is just a supreme athlete, and I don't think Terrence is anywhere near his ballpark of like athletically gifted by God. But I'll say this, in between the two, Bud is definitely a lot more athletic than Errol Spence. And what I mean by that is Bud, I would trust him in more sports to be successful than I would Errol Spence. I think Errol Spence is good at boxing, and that's probably about where it would stand. Spence, like you said, he wrestles, he also power lifts, so we know he's strong. He's played football, basketball. He's just very athletic all the way around. I don't think he relies as much on his athletics as Roy Jones did, because you saw when Roy Jones started to slow down, he got knocked out by Tarver, Glenn Johnson. He didn't have that reaction time and that speed to get out of the way like he used to. Whereas I see Bud, he has slowed down. Against Porter, he got hit more than he ever did. Against Avanesian, he was getting hit a lot. So his feet are actually slowed down, but he's still technically sound enough to still have a good defense and position off of it where, you know, him losing speed hasn't really affected him that much like it did Roy Jones. So in a long way to say, yes, I believe he's more gifted talent-wise, but I also think he has a good boxing IQ as well.
Who do you think is the stronger of the two? Because when when Crawford moved up and he got in the ring with Sean Porter, and again, I don't think that was peak Sean Porter at all. But I think what surprised Sean Porter and what surprised me quite a bit was how strong Terence Crawford was on the inside and how strong he was, particularly in the clinches, and how he was almost manhandling a ball like Sean Porter. Do you think that, despite the fact that Errol Spence is expected to be the biggest man for this fight, that Crawford is going to be the guy who's actually significantly stronger in the clinches if they come to it, if it comes to sort of a ragdoll fight or a fight of attrition? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, and you could also see it like whenever Jeff Horn fought Manny Pacquiao, even though I thought Manny won the fight, there was multiple times in that fight where Jeff Horn was flinging around Manny like he was a little child. And when Jeff Horn fought Terence Crawford in his first step-up fight, Terence was flinging him around like a little child. So he's definitely physically strong. Now, will he be stronger than Spence? That's yet to be seen. I don't know how much Spence is going to come in on the night. I know Spence has said several times that he walks around about 190 pounds. And Crawford, to me, looks like he might be 155, 160 at the biggest outside of fight comp. So even if Terence Crawford is slightly stronger than Errol Spence, he's still got to overcome the difference in the weight. And that means he needs to be significantly stronger than Spence to do that. Now, how strong is Errol Spence? I don't know. I know I've heard other fighters who have fought him say that he's incredibly strong. But again, I don't know if Spence works out with weights like Terence does because he trains for power. So you could be right. Crawford could be the stronger man in the ring, potentially, or Spence may be slightly stronger than him due to the size difference and the natural strength. I don't know. But go ahead.
No, it's okay. I was going to ask, would you agree with me that Crawford, I don't want to use the word overrated because that's crazy, but do you know, in boxing, we have a habit of looking at fighters' pluses and not looking at a fighter's flaws. We discussed it with Usyk, right? Where I think Usyk got hit quite a bit in his fight with Chisora. I thought Usyk got hit quite a lot in his fight with Anthony Joshua. I've seen Usyk get hit a lot in fights with Marius Briedis. I've seen Usyk get hit a lot in fights with Michael Hunter. But yet you talk to people online about Alexander Usyk, and they'll tell you he's going to get in the ring with Deontay Wilder, and he's not going to get hit for any of the rounds, and he's going to school him in a 12-round decision or stop him late. And it's sort of like what people perceive of as the fighter, what people perceive as the fighter, isn't necessarily what we're seeing on camera when we're doing film study on a fighter. I wanted to ask you, do you think, again, I'm not saying it's Terence Crawford overrated, but let me give you an example on Terence Crawford's defense. It does seem to me like people do perceive Terence Crawford as this sort of defensive mastermind who can't be hit, is a sort of hit and don't get hit fighter, and kind of almost like a defensive whiz. That's the way I see people talk about it. And I feel like I hear people talk about Usyk in the same light. Do you think that there's a bit of eulogizing going on in the boxing community about these type of fighters? And do you think guys like Terence Crawford do have flaws out there that, people are just sort of, for whatever reason, like not sort of picking up on and not watching, particularly defensively? Sorry, Tony, if I'm not making sense, but let me know if you get that.
No, I got you. Yeah, he definitely has defensive flaws, but to people who think that fighters don't have defensive flaws, they never fought before. That's why they idolize these people and think they're like Charles Martin, walk like a god. But no, I mean, he's definitely got flaws defensively. Like I said, in his last 2 fights, we saw him get hit more than he normally does. So it's showing that he can be hit. And here's the thing about his defense. Every fight that he's fought and every fighter that he's came up against are all headhunters. I really look back on his resume and the guys that he fought to see who's really going to assault his body like Errol Spence, and I couldn't find one. So while he has been defensively sound, there is leakage. Every fighter has leakage. I don't know how good he is at taking shots or blocking shots to the body because he's never really been in a situation to where he's had to block high-low. It's always just been head hunting. Even Kell Brook, when Kell Brook fought Errol Spence, he was very agile, going up and down, working the body, working the head. But whenever he fought Terence, he just head hunted the whole time. So I don't know. Like his defense could be very leaky in this fight, being that he's never had to block to the body.
If you're Spence, you're going to fight this fight at close quarters, yeah? You're going to fight this. How does Spence get close to Crawford without getting picked off coming in? Because I think that's the plain and simple reason why most people are going to pick Crawford to win this fight by KO. Because throughout his career, Errol Spence is a guy who's been seen as very, very hittable, particularly on the way in. He closes distance to that from the mid-range and he tries to close up close and start landing those body shots. But he's been hit on the way in, yeah, quite a bit. Particularly coming up as a prospect, he's been hit by a couple of guys coming up and away, and guys like Phil Grecos and Chris Van der Heerdens and etc. etc. So there have been a few question marks, right, about Errol Spence on the way in. Does he move his head enough? Is he a little bit too robotic? Is he a bit too static? Is he a bit too one-dimensional on the way in? Does he feint enough on the way in? You're dealing with a guy in Terence Crawford who's probably one of the best timers of a punch in all of boxing. Not only one of the most physically gifted fighters in all of boxing, but Terence Crawford has a fantastic sense of timing. If Errol Spence is going to want to get to the inside, and start landing to Terence Crawford's body and making his weight count and making it sort of a physical fight. Is he going to have to do something he's never done before? Or is he just going to go balls to the wall, just look to quicken up his feet, lots of hustle? Do you know what I mean? Just try to be really crude about it. How does he go about it, Tony? Does he get really crude and just say, look, I'm just going to set a high pace, high foot speed, set a pattern from the get-go, dictate the tempo and just do it that way? Or does he try and be clever about it and try and, use a few more feints or use a bit more head movement to try and craft his way in? How do you think Spence goes about that? And how do you see a way for Spence to get up close and get to the body without sort of taking any significant shots coming in?
Well, here's the thing about it. Terence Crawford has been dropped by Mean Machine, Gamboa, and I want to say he got put down. They didn't count the Mean Machine, but he got dropped. And I believe one other fighter dropped him. I just can't remember who. Errol Spence, to my knowledge, my memory, I don't think he's ever been dropped. The most we've ever seen him hurt was against Ugas when he turned his head to look at the ground to see if his mouthpiece was his teeth or his mouthpiece, and he got hit by a shot he didn't see, and he still stayed up on his feet and took it well. So as far as the counterpunching goes, with all that being said, I'm not convinced that Terence is just going to be this devastating puncher that's going to knock him out, because I think Errol Spence's chin has been tested and has been proven to be extremely strong. And the thing about it is this: for the same reason why Canelo lost to Bivol, that's what Crawford is. He's a counterpuncher, whereas Bivol is a volume puncher, and so is Spence. The difference in Spence and other guys that Terence has counterpunched is Spence doesn't put his all into every single punch. He touches you. And somebody who throws little touch punches, and I'm not saying Spence can't get hit, because he has been hit. You're right. People do say stuff about his defense. However, it gets harder and harder to time somebody when they're just throwing little pity patters and you don't know when the real committed shot is coming.
Correct.
Because they can counterpunch off your counterpunch. They can set you up to bait you in to throw something, and then they take that little half step back and bow, they hit you with everything they have while you're throwing everything into your shot. So you're leading into theirs. That's what Spence does very well. So I think it's going to be hard for Crawford to just counterpunch him like that. And also, as far as the range of the fight goes, to answer that question, Spence is significantly taller. He's got about a 2-inch height advantage, maybe 2.5 inches. It's significant. Now, Bud does have the longer arms, but the longer arms doesn't per se mean you can always touch somebody's face that's taller than you, because people don't calculate in body lean. So you can have longer arms than somebody, but they can have a longer torso than you. And when you're throwing forward, even though your arms are longer, you're coming towards them, they lean back. Now they can hit your face and you can't touch theirs because their torso is longer than your reach. So
I understand. Keep going. I understand.
Yeah. So I don't think it's going to be. I do believe Terence is going to land counter shots on him. I just don't think it's going to be as frequent or as cleanly land as people think is going to be.
Do you want to run us through how you think this fight's going to go? How do you think the fight's going to start? Cagey start? What do you think?
I think Terence is going to be real cagey. He's going to be looking to calculate, download information. He's going to be looking to set up counter shots.
He's a slow starter, Tony. Do you think that's a fair comment
slow.
to say that Terence Crawford is a slow starter? And a lot of people haven't picked up on that either. That he is a fighter who, in a lot of these fights, some of these biggest fights, has been known to give away rounds early and get into the fight. But there's only so many fights you can necessarily do that in. Carry on.
Yeah, he's going to be down a minimum of 2 to 3 rounds at the start of the fight. He's going to be down. So this is my whole thing. This is what I look at, and then I'll break it down. You got a guy who doesn't start fighting until the 3rd or 4th round. That's when he gets into the fight. You also have a guy who has no promoter backing him. He's going into enemy territory, in the enemy's backyard, and you're expecting him to win on the scorecards. That's normally in boxing not what happens. On top of that, you also have a fighter who's very economical and likes to set up his shots versus a guy who just throws a lot of shots. And he'll give away shots, but he just accumulates. So you got a volume puncher versus a guy who's economical. You got a guy going into the enemy's backyard, a guy without any machine backing him against a guy who's a star of the PBC. And he's a slow starter. I just don't see how he wins outside of a knockout, because if it goes to the scorecards, he's just not going to land enough shots to win. And that's really what it's going to come down to. With Errol Spence, I could see him breaking Terence Crawford down because he's done it before. I don't think he will, but I'm saying it's a possibility because he's broken a lot of fighters down. But most importantly, he can also win on the scorecard. When I look at Terence, he's only got one option. That's to knock out Errol Spence. And that's a tall task because Errol Spence has never been dropped. He's never truly been hurt, in my opinion. I've never seen him spaghetti noodle legs. I've never seen him stagger. I've never seen him hold on for dear life because he was about to drop. So when you're looking at a guy whose only hope, really truthfully, is to knock the other guy out because of the way he fights, and the other guy's never been hurt before, the odds don't really lean in his favor. So
is Crawford, would you say, just going through, I'm not going to cheat and look at Errol Spence's resume. Would you say he's the biggest puncher that Spence has ever faced? I'm just thinking about Brook was a pretty large puncher at his peak. I'm just trying to think. I've never known Sean Porter as a devastating puncher.
No,
Danny Garcia.
He's really only got two. He's got Danny Garcia, who really
Yeah,
wasn't a huge puncher at 147, but he was at 140. And he's got Kell Brook, as you mentioned. We know Kell Brook's power is real because it also transferred up to a 154. Out of the three fights he had there, two of them he won by knockout. So I would say Kell Brook is probably the hardest puncher he ever fought. Now, how much harder of a puncher? I don't know if Bud hits harder or Kell hits harder. I would assume that Kell probably punch for punch hits harder just because he's a much bigger dude than Terrence,
yeah.
but I really don't know.
Um, it's interesting you say that. So, are you saying here, out of 10, give me the odds that you think we could see something controversial happen tomorrow night? Out of 10.
Oh shit. I mean, if it's a close fight, I would say you're probably looking at a 90% chance that Spence is gonna like it's if it's a 7-5 fight and everybody clearly sees it 7-5 for Bud, it'll be controversial. 90% chance that
Do you know what?
Spence
Do you
will
know
win.
what I find? I don't know if I'm talking shit, guys in the chat. Guys, we'll keep turning for a little bit longer. If you want to get some questions in, where you can ask Tony direct. I'll forward your questions to Tony. But I don't know if you guys in the chat and Tony understand what I'm saying. But I'm going to say something that might not make a lot of sense, but I'm going to say it. Do you know, Tony? You have these fights where one guy is perceived as a prohibitive favorite, right? So you get into these fights where it's a big fight, but most people are expecting one guy to win, right? And they're expecting that one guy to win convincingly, right? I do find that that tends to become a burden on that fighter when the fight comes, because I feel like if he doesn't win and doesn't win convincingly and isn't winning the rounds convincingly in the way that people expect, they start giving rounds to the other fighter just simply for doing well. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I've seen that in numerous big
Well,
fights
yeah,
where the
definitely
fighter
it
is
makes
expected to go in and destroy somebody, and because he doesn't, right, and the fighter B is doing a lot better than what people expect, all of a sudden people start, the perception is, start giving rounds to fighter
I'll
B.
give you a
And
prime
we've
example.
seen that.
I'll give you a
Go,
prime
go.
example. That just happened. That just happened. I had this fight personally a draw, and after the fact, I had to go because I didn't catch it. I fell asleep on the before the fight happened. I'll get into what fight, but I looked up the CompuBox numbers. 3 of the 12 rounds, they landed the exact amount of punches. 2 of the 12 rounds, it was only one punch that separated them. The fight that I'm talking about is George Kambosos versus Maxie Hughes. Everybody was saying it was a robbery. Kambosos lost the fight, blah, 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 because they were saying that Maxie Hughes wasn't on Kambosos' level. Kambosos had been in there, beat Tio. He was in there with Devin Haney twice. It should be an easy fight for him. It wasn't an easy fight. And I think that fight right there, people just started giving Maxie rounds by default. But if you actually look at the statistical data, it wasn't a Maxie Hughes win. It just wasn't. In my opinion, it was a draw, but I don't think it was a robbery by any stretch. But I think that's what happened. Now, the thing with that being said is, if that is the narrative going into this fight, then it's even worse for Terence Crawford because he's the betting favorite. He's the one that most people are saying is going to win the fight. He's also the one, I mean, it's invisible, it's not real, but he's actually also fighting for the hypothetical rank of pound for pound number one. Because there's a lot of people now trying to say, and no, he's better than him because of how he beat Fulton. So he also has the pressure in the people's eye to look very good against Errol Spence Jr. to keep that number one pound for pound spot. So that what you threw out there, that curveball, to me plays against Bud even more in this fight.
Tell me how you think this fight's going to go.
So if I had to guess, I think Errol Spence is going to do exactly what he said. He's going to step to him from round one. He's going to start probing with the jab because he loves to throw the jab a lot. He's going to try to find his range, measure Terence Crawford. I think that's going to go on for the first round and a half. In the first round and a half, I think Terence is going to be very hesitant. I think he's going to let some shots go in the first round, more than what he's accustomed to doing, but I still don't think it's going to be enough to keep up with Spence. I think the fight starts to liven up around the end half of the second round to where Terence is now trying to step in, let off shots, and I think he's going to start walking into body shots. Come the third round, I see Terence slowing down to try to figure out why these shots are hitting his body, and he's going to give that round away. I think he'll fight, but I think it's going to be more cautious again. Fourth round, I think it livens up again. and they both go at each other. I think rounds 4 through 6, maybe even 4 through 7, are going to be pretty 50-50. I think they could go either way. But I think by the eighth round, at some point in time, Spence is going to hurt Bud. And then Bud is going to be Bud and do what Bud does. And he's going to throw all caution in the wind. He's going to try to be the dog that he is and outdog the bigger dog. You know, there's a lot of junkyard dogs, but you got to understand, there's pit bulls in the junkyard and there's chihuahuas in the junkyard. And it doesn't turn out well when a chihuahua tries to fight a pit bull head on. So I think he's going to be his own worst enemy by his disposition. I think around the eighth round is where he's really going to start letting his hands go, and he's just going to get overwhelmed. And I think towards the 11th and 12th round, the fight's going to die down, and he's going to try to fight off the back foot like he did against Post Style. It's going to go to decision, and it's probably going to be an 8-4 in favor of Spence, in my opinion.
Just run me through one more time this bodywork, okay?
Okay.
How does he get to the? Just tell me one more time. How exactly does Spence get to this body of Terence Crawford? Run me through this one more time.
How does he get to the? Well, it's easy. For one, as I stated earlier, nobody's really ever attacked Terence Crawford's body. Terence likes to do a lot of leaping in and out, which is perfect for the jab coming to the body because you almost leap into it.
Okay.
Also, Terence likes to almost when he leaps, when he's southpaw, he likes to almost leap to his right side and try to throw a right hook to the head. That leaves that body wide open if you go underneath and you catch him on the leap.
Okay.
I think the way that Errol Spence fights and as many punches as he throws and the touches that he does, he's going to start picking up on the timing. And that's what it's going to be. Whereas Bud has very great timing, I think Spence is going to start timing when that body opens up, and he's just going to start catching them time after time after time after time again. And whenever Bud gets hit to the body where he's not used to being hit, say 5 or 6 hard shots by hooks to the body, he's going to start backing off because he's going to try to figure out what's going on.
I think I understand what you're trying to say. So are you basically trying to say, if I summarize it for people who aren't, do you think Bud's going to do a lot of falling in this fight? Because that's one way to get caught with body shots, right? Is to fall in off your work and to fall in off your shots, yeah? And then you give up the body. You know, you go for a big right hand over the top, you fall in off your work, someone can slip counter you to the body, or use your momentum against you. Am I on the point there? Yeah. Falling short, falling in a lot with the shots.
That we'll go with that, yeah.
Yeah, falling in a lot with the shots. Which, listen, we've seen Crawford do. You know, and we see him do that in a fight with Porter. He can get very, very aggressive in fights, particularly when he thinks he's got a guy hurt. And he does, you know, he can fall in behind his shots and fall into his own work. And we've seen it time and time again with guys falling in. I mean, listen, let me just say this: I would never try and compare Kell Brook with Terence Crawford because they're just, you know, Crawford's on a different level to Kell Brook, right? But I'm just saying, like, we've seen the danger of this in the Brook fight. Brook was a guy who loved to set guys up for the straight right hand over the top. But Brook was always a guy who fell in. And that was actually his trademark. He did it against Porter. Brook would throw the straight right, and then he'd fall in over his own shot, and then he'd clinch a guy like Porter. He'd tie him up, yeah? He'd hold. Some people would say he'd hold excessively, and then he'd spin him around, and then he'd go back to work, right? And we've seen Porter do bits and bobs of that in fights with the likes of Porter and things like that, throwing a shot, falling in, blah blah blah. You've got to know your distance with a guy like Errol Spence, and we saw that in the Brook fight. You know, he's not the kind of guy that you really want to be falling in over your shots in or falling into the middle with, because he's a guy who can go and make you pay with that. And again, Tony, the head doesn't move, the head moves, but the body doesn't move. Is that? I know I did you a disservice there, but I'm just trying to dumb it down a bit.
No, you're good. You're right on it. You're right. The head does move and the body doesn't. Like, it's there to be hit. It's there to be taken. And the thing about it is, I don't like to get into like the mental behind it because I'm not a psychiatrist. But
go for it. Let's hear it. Go for it.
I called this out for the Fulton fight. Originally, I thought Fulton was going to beat Inouye. I really did. I listed all the reasons why he would beat him. However, I was over on a different boxing channel and I heard them giving out all these excuses about double stacking, glove skinning, and I was like, what is he talking about? And then I found out that Fulton and his team were talking about Inouye did illegal wraps before the fight. They were already doing built-in excuses. So in my mind, I'm like, this dude's nervous. He's scared. He's already come up with excuses. He's not going to let his hands go. He's going to give Inouye way too much respect, and he's going to lose. He's going to lose the fight, and that's why I changed my pick. And this fight right here, I think Bud is rattled mentally because I mean, look at the press conference yesterday. This dude literally got into an argument with a fan in the crowd, and he's never done that before. When people start acting different and doing things that they're not normally doing, they're not accustomed to doing, then you know there's something bothering them because they're diverting their energy and taking it out on somebody that doesn't really deserve it. And I think he's nervous. I think this is the first time in Terrence's mind that he's in a 50-50 fight. And I think the pressure is getting to him. And I think it's going to reflect in the ring as well.
That is something that's very, very interesting, I have to say, because again, like I said before, listen, Tony, I think most fighters are or get nervous at pretty much at one stage before they fight. But obviously, you've been there and you can tell me right or wrong. We did hear from Crawford, didn't he? Discuss the possibility of losing, didn't he? I think somebody asked him if he thought about losing, and I think he said he had thought about losing, which I think is a fair and honest answer, I think. But I don't know, Tony. I mean, what do you think about the fact that there's been no spice in the build-up? I think that's a good sign for both fighters, from both Crawford and Spence. That tells us that we could see a great fight here. Is that the fighters don't really feel the need to hype this up. They don't really feel the need to sort of cuss each other's mums and throw a glass of water at each other or do Derek Chisora and start throwing tables at each other. They've both sort of accepted, haven't they, that what is going to be on the night is what's going to be. And it seems like they've accepted that nothing that they say or do before the fight is going to make any difference to this fight. Yeah. What's going to make the difference in this fight is what happens on the night. Yeah. And as a result, both of them are just gonna go for it. And I think that's pretty interesting to me there. Do you read anything into that? The lack of a trash talk. Both guys, to me, Tony, that's a good sign. So, Tony, when I don't really get involved in mentals, right? But when I start seeing fighters, like you said, act out of accordance before the press conference. So they start chucking things around. They start throwing tables. They start behaving out of the ordinary. They start saying things that they wouldn't normally say. To me, Tony, alarm bells start ringing, because really, for me, fighters should kind of know, like, look, you're going to get hit by, two hands and two fists in the ring. That's what's going to do the job. What happened outside of the ring, all the stare downs, who looked who in the eyes the longest, who looked away first is irrelevant. The fight is going to be won by who has the most skill in the ring. I think the good thing for boxing fans in this fight is both of these two guys realize that, Tony. Do you get what I'm trying to say there? Sorry.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. But you got to understand, Errol Spence isn't really a big shit talker anyways. Like, you saw that whenever bringing up Kell Brook again. Kell Brook was like, listen, you're going to get the chocolate brownies. And he was like, I don't even know what the fuck chocolate brownies are.
Yeah.
But Spence isn't the biggest talker, and neither is Terence. Terence is more laid back and quiet. And I mean, I think that's fine. I don't think everybody has to talk like a Muhammad Ali, a Roy Jones, a Mike Tyson, a Tyson Fury. You don't have to be that way. If the fight's great, the fight's going to be great. So I agree with you.
You say Crawford's just, I think, one thing, because you say Crawford's fighting against the promotion, but he's got a one-fight deal with PBC anyway. So if he wins or loses, he's got a fight with PBC anyway, right? He signed a was it a 2-fight deal with PBC? So you're sure they're not going to give him the decision?
It's a rematch clause, but no, because you got to look at it like this. Controversy, it sells very well. So if they rob Terence on the scorecards, that's only going to make the rematch bigger. So I see it all ways around. If Spence wins, great for Al Heyman, because he has his lifelong fighter with him. If Terence gets the knockout, I mean, the PBC won't like it, but they get the rematch that's going to make it huge. But if it's a controversial win for Spence, they're going to love it, because that's going to make more people tune in for the second one.
Huge money. That's the money decision, isn't it? That's the money decision. All right, Tony, give us your Shevin. If you want to pop on, I'll give 5 minutes to Shevin. Tony, give us your final thoughts on it. Tony, you know what? I'll be honest with you. I want to see Errol Spence. Sorry, Tony, I muted myself by mistake. Tony, give us your final thoughts, Tony. I might just see if Shevin wants to come on afterwards, but I think we're going to wrap this up, Tony. But let me ask you, right? You're picking Errol Spence, I believe, right, to win this fight. Tony, I would love to see Errol Spence win this fight. I'm going to have to go with Terence Crawford in this fight. And I hope I'm wrong, right? And guys, if you want to be around tonight, we should have quite a few people in tomorrow night, 4 a.m. The plan is to at least do a post fight. I might cover the fight live and then bring people in afterwards, but we'll definitely at least hopefully have a post fight show if we still have a YouTube channel after all the stuff we said about Conor Benn today. I'm going to go with Terence Crawford by stoppage, you know. And you know what, Tony? Some of the stuff you said has made an impact on me, you know. Like Spence hasn't ever really been hurt apart from the Ugas fight, but obviously you said he thought his gum shield came out and he was looking around for it. Then he got caught in the middle of looking for his gum shield and this and that. And my gut says, and I shouldn't really be picking on gut, my gut says that Spence is tight at the weight. He kills himself to make the weight. He don't look particularly healthy at the weigh-in. I think Errol Spence, what gets me the most is it's just Crawford's timing against Spence coming on the inside. That's what bothers me about it the most, Tony. That's what I can't get out of my head, Tony. I can't get out of my head how Errol Spence can close the distance on Terence Crawford without taking a straight rear hand down the middle as he's walking in. But like I said, Tony, one thing about Spence, and I did say this before, and people need to watch out for this in a fight. I wish I had the CompuBox stats with me, but I don't, right? But Errol Spence is very, very good at stopping the other opponent's jab, you know, with the lead hand control that he uses. Now, I don't know if that'll be a factor in this fight because obviously Crawford may fight southpaw, so the hands may not be on the same side, yeah? But certainly against orthodox fighters, Errol Spence is exceptional at shutting down the jab of the opponent. I've seen him parry it down. I've seen him place his jab over the opponent's jab hand. He's very, very, very effective at stopping opponents leading off with the jab, which then is how he's able to close distance and walk into the pocket so effectively. And I do think that, Tony, is something that people are missing out on. But I don't know if that will work on Crawford per se because of Crawford's going to fight as a southpaw. But give us your final thoughts, Tony, on the fight. And Tony will be here hopefully tomorrow. Hopefully, I'm hoping tomorrow we're going to go balls to the wall. I'm hoping to get a few hundred in here tomorrow. We've done it in the past on American shows. Me and Shevin, I don't know if it will happen tomorrow because there's so many different channels that are going to be covering this fight. But me and Shevin, we've done Gervonta Davis fights, and somehow there've been 700 people here. So I'm hoping for a miracle tomorrow. Tony, give us your final thoughts, Tony. Just say anything that comes to your mind. Anything that comes to your mind.
Yeah, I'm gonna say I'm the opposite of you. I hope and I wish Terrence wins because I would love to see him make history, be the first 2-division undisputed champion. I would love to see that for him because I've been watching him for a long time. His biggest advantage, in my opinion, which we didn't bring up going into this fight, is the fact that Spence has been inactive for, I think, about 15 months because the whole time Spence was trying to make this fight with Bud, Bud decided to make the Avenesian fight. So Bud's been active, Spence has sat on the sideline. So that's his biggest advantage if Spence comes in with ring rust and his timing and his speed is off. However, when I have a guy that I've never seen hurt and he's a volume puncher fighting a smaller guy who's a counter puncher, I almost always go with the volume puncher over the counter puncher because I know when it comes to them scorecards, counter punchers rarely win rounds on them. And that's why.
Do you know what? I think that's a fucking good point you've made there, to be honest, Tony. Guys in the chat, I know all of us are picking Crawford to win this fight, but just guys in the chat, what do you think about what Tony's just said there? That when you get a close fight of this magnitude and you've got the bigger guy who's a volume puncher against the smaller guy who's the counter puncher, can you see how we could be getting some very, very tasty cards coming? Finish up, Tony. Finish up. Carry on.
No, that's really all I have to say on it. Like, I think we went over everything pretty good, pretty surgical.
Brother, hopefully I see you tomorrow. Hopefully we'll have a load of people in here, man. I really appreciate you, my man.
All right, man. I appreciate you and have a good night.
See you soon, bro. See you soon. Look who's back. Shevin, what are we saying?
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3.
What are we saying, Chev? Chev, who are you picking for this fight, Shevin?
You know, for the past 4 or 5 years, I've always thought that Errol Spence would win the fight. And I thought Errol would win it because I always felt that two things. One, I feel like his body work would really break down Crawford. And two, I can never get out of my head the chin that Errol showed in that Kell Brook fight, which I thought he was going to lose. I mean, there were so many shots that Brooke hit him with in that fight. I don't know how he was still on his feet. And I just kind of hung on that for years and years and years. His chin and his ability to break people down to the body, right? The chin is still there. I think I've seen him get hurt against Sean Porter. I've seen him get hurt against Ugas, which those guys are world-class fighters. There should not be any shame in that, but obviously he can be hurt like anyone else can, even with a very strong chin. So I've always leaned him, but seeing him get hurt against those guys kind of made me lean towards Crawford. Right up until yesterday, I watched Baylorick do his live, and he broke down how he thinks Earl's going to knock Crawford out. He thinks he's going to finish him early. And he broke it down very simple, very simplistically. And he says, overall, regardless of the weight class, regardless of the fighter, I don't like guys who get hit a lot, who are very average to poor defensively. He was talking about Crawford, going up against someone that can punch. If someone has a defensive flaw, like he thinks Crawford does, and they're going against someone that's a puncher, the defensive flaw guy most likely is going to lose.
Can I just quickly butt in and ask you something? No. So, and it's very rude. I just want to say before I get off my mind, Shevin, do you not think that Crawford, for me, is rightly the favourite to win? But do you not think there are some red flags in some of these performances that Crawford's put on? I think there's some red flags in rounds 1 to 6 against Sean Porter. There's red flags in rounds 1 to 3 against Kell Brook that people are just sort of willfully ignoring. Carry on, Shevin. Just think there's things in there in that defense, and the way he was getting hit by Kell rounds 1 to 3, the way he was getting hit by Sean Porter in rounds 1 to 6, and people just seem to be literally ignoring. I mean, I've got Crawford to win, but people are literally seem to be, and again, it goes back to the whole Usyk thing, Shevin. People really seem to be overlooking, that these guys can be hit. These guys do throw shots. They fall into their shots, etc., etc. They are there. Crawford's a guy who sometimes gets a little bit too explosive with his shots. He falls into the middle. There's guys that they do have defensive weaknesses and do get hit with shots. But for some reason, a lot of these fans, they don't want to seem to acknowledge that part of Crawford's weaknesses. They don't want to seem to acknowledge any of the weaknesses that Crawford has in his fight. Sorry for sharing for button, and I just wanted to get that before I forget. Carry on, please.
No, that's the same point that Baylorick made. That's the same point he made. And it's not him getting hit in those rounds by Brook or by Porter would not have been a big deal if that was Kell Brook from 2015, right? But the version in which he's in there getting hit with by that version of Kell Brook, you can't be, number 1 or 2 in the world taking shots like that from a guy who, at this point in his career is a gatekeeper. You just can't, man. You can't be in there, be number 1, number 2 guy in the world, getting hit consistently for round after round after round by a gatekeeper. You just can't. You're on another level right now, the way where he's at. So that's very concerning. So because of Baylorick's breakdown, I think that I'm leaning back towards Earl now. I'm leaning back towards Earl's going to take this fight for the same reasons before. The chin's there. I think the body work's going to be something very, very difficult for Crawford to overcome in the late rounds.
But how is he going to get to him? Okay.
Well, like you just said, how well Earl really, really, really dismisses or gets rid of the other person's jab.
Okay.
So I think if he's getting rid of Crawford's jab, here's the thing. I don't think it's going to be anything sexy about how Earl gets into range to get to Crawford's body.
Yeah. Okay.
I legit think he's going to come in, chin out, thinking that he can take Crawford's shots. And he might be right about that. If he's right about that, he'll win the fight. And
you could be right. Sometimes in fights, right? And we over tacticalize how these fights will go. And it might just be that Spence just quickens up his feet. It literally might just be from round 1, Errol Spence sets a high pace and he quickens up his feet. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he just tries to get to Crawford. We know Crawford's a slow starter in fights. And it might just be that Spence comes out the traps quicker than usual, really quickens up his feet and just, closes him down. That could happen. Obviously, Crawford is one of the best timers of a punch in boxing. Yeah, in boxing, which would worry me. But just to say, it could be as simple as that. It could be Errol Spence could start for I think
Do you know what? I do think, sorry, Shevin, the start could be, the more I think about this fight, the more I'm starting to think how important the start of this fight could be. Because that's another thing that people, and we discussed it with Tony. And again, I think Crawford was going to win this fight. But again, Shevin, he's a slow starter. And it's, you listen to the guys online, they never bring this stuff up, Shevin, really. Like you guys on Twitter and this and that. Crawford's notorious for being a slow starter in them first 4 rounds, Shevin.
Yeah, and to go to echo Tony's point, because Earl is the younger fighter, if it's very close, Earl's going to get the decision. So I think that I don't think Crawford's going to knock him out. But to go back to what you just said about him being a slow starter, I think that Earl wants to get inside early and just smother. Earl's one of the few guys I've ever seen that he fights in a way that it looks like he's smothering his work, but even in those small spaces, he really gets shots off. I saw him do it against Dan Garcia. I see him do that against Campos, where he's a guy that does not need a lot of space to get shots off to the body. He does not need a lot of space to do that. On the contrary, Crawford doesn't need a lot of space either to throw some of those hooks in up top. But Earl doesn't need a lot of space to get his work off to the body. So I really think he's going to get inside, lean on him, and try and fight this entire fight in the pocket. I know that everyone's talking about the weight cut for Earl, and that's been a concern for me. But here's the thing about that. And I think I saw Derek James address this. And this is something that Baylor said. Baylor he knows Derek personally. And he said he had this conversation with Baylor years ago. People talk about the weight cut, Earl's weight cut, getting older, the weight cut. And we got to remember something. He's been doing this for a long time. Like, he's cut down to this weight from 170. Jesus Christ, for what, 10 times now? His last 10, 12 fights?
He ain't never been in the ring with no fucking Crawford, though. That's the
He'll put this way. Look,
Crawford.
I'm glad you said that. Because that's the point, the final point that Baylor had made that kind of got me leaning towards Earl. And that's simply that, Crawford might be more skilled. He very well might be. But there's no question that Earl has been in the ring with better fighters, especially lately. So he's been with better fighters lately. I think that matters.
Okay. What about this? Tony raised a good counterpoint, which I actually go with that. More so than they've been in a better fight, been in the ring with better fighters recently. Well, actually, what was that? I think Tony's argument was that overall, if you look at Crawford's resume overall and take it into account overall in terms of who he's beat over the course of his career and compare it side by side with Spence's, that they're pretty much even.
Yeah, you can make that case of what Crawford was facing at 140.
Yeah, rather than looking at welterweight in isolation.
Yeah, that's true.
I go with the theory, to be honest with you, that the better fighter is just going to be the better fighter. And the point that he raised in as well was about Usyk. Usyk didn't have a great resume compared to Anthony Joshua. And when the two of them got in the ring for the first time, Usyk absolutely fucking clowned Anthony Joshua for most of that first fight. And Anthony Joshua had fought far better competition at heavyweight than Alexander Usyk had fought at heavyweight. And yet when the two of them got in the ring, the talent gap was just so fucking large, it didn't fucking matter. Coincidentally, you had one guy in Anthony Joshua who had all the fucking physical attributes. He was supposed to be the guy who was going to push forward and was supposed to be the guy that was going to make it physical. And they was talking that fight about Anthony Joshua, hitting Usyk to the body and hitting him on the arms and hitting him on the gloves and being the bigger man and using his physicality, yeah? And what did we actually see in the fight? Well, what actually happened in practice was Anthony Joshua got in the ring with a much smaller guy, but he didn't know he couldn't figure out the angles. He couldn't figure out where the shots were coming from, and he couldn't deal with the activity and the pace. Now, Crawford, to be fair, that's one thing that Crawford doesn't really have. Like, Crawford isn't like, I could be wrong, but I don't think Crawford's a particularly like high active fighter. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's not like, we're not dealing with like an Usyk or a Lomachenko, yeah? Someone who's sort of moving around and, is constantly being active. Even when they're not punching, their non-punching activity is very high. There's a lot of feinting, there's a lot of head movement, there's a lot of pivoting from side to side, and they're setting traps and they're baiting you. So it becomes very, very, very mentally fatiguing, because it's not just that their punching activity, but it's also that activity when they're not punching, yeah? They're still occupying your brain and occupying your mind a lot when they're not punching, and that drains the opponent. Now, Spence is going to have to deal with that per se. But I just thought I'd throw that out to you as a curveball, what we saw with Usyk and Joshua. At the end of the day, all this stuff about resume and size and physicality, it didn't really matter, because at the end of the day, he got in with a guy who just had more tools in the toolbox. He just got in with a guy who had more tools in the toolbox. He was getting hit. Usyk wasn't particularly known as a big puncher either, but he hurt Anthony Joshua, nearly got him out of there in the 12th round. Every time he was hitting him flush, he was hitting him accurately, clean, he was hurting him. Does that make sense, Shevin, what I'm trying to say there?
Yeah, he hurt with volume because no, whether you're a big puncher or not, if someone can't throw a 10 or a 9 punch, but they can hit you 10 times with a bunch of 8s, it's the same effect. And see, I do think that Earl's going to be the one in this fight that's going to definitely be throwing more punches. And I think the attrition matters. And I think another thing about Earl I really like about him is his stamina. His stamina and his endurance. And I think a lot of people are leaning towards Crawford. One reason, we all fall to recency bias in the sense of they saw Ugas hurt Earl really bad, almost had him out of there, right?
Correct.
And my counter to that is, I think Crawford would beat Ugas, but I don't know that. Ugas is a very, very good fighter. I don't know if Crawford would beat him. I think he would, but I don't think that's like a wash fight. Ugas could cause Crawford the exact same problems he did Errol Spence. So he's that good to me. So I don't put as much onus on, he got hurt by Ugas. Okay, Ugas not some bum. It's no shame being hurt by him.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. We'll have to see tomorrow, brother. Hopefully you're going to come on tomorrow with Tony.
I'll be on.
We're going to do it because I think, like I said before, I'm planning. I'm going to try and spend tomorrow. So, guys, fingers crossed. Tomorrow I'm going to get up if I can, if I'm still alive and still breathing, and if I still have a YouTube channel, I'm going to get up and start watching some of these fights and doing a bit of a film study, which I should have done. I'll do what I always do. I haven't really been training too much, but I do what I always do on a fight day, which is go and hit the heavy bag at least. Do you know what I mean? I don't believe you can come on and make it and talk about boxing without doing any sort of boxing activity. I used to go and have a little spar actually before previous shows. A lot of people don't know that, but before I used to do a lot of the previous shows, I used to go and have a little spar because just to get in the boxing mood, be around boxing people before we talk about boxing. So I won't be able to do that tomorrow, but I'll certainly be on the heavy bag. I'll try and do 10-12 on the heavy bag. I'll have a chat with Shevin on DMs. Hopefully we'll be getting Tony over. And guys, hopefully we get a lot of people in here. Hopefully we're the UK channel. I probably will do a live commentary on it. And then what we'll do is we'll bring Shevin and Tony in to do the post-fight. Shevin, who are you going for again?
Give me Errol Spence, man. Give me Errol Spence. Give me Errol Spence and Billerick because he's convinced me.
Yeah, he's convinced you because he fucking knows Derek James. But I'm telling you now,
right?
Terence Crawford's going to ice him, and we're all going to be on here tomorrow crying about it. All right, brother. Let's see what happens tomorrow. All right.
All right. Talk to you later.
See you in a bit. Peace out.